Well, there are a few bright spots in the middle of all of this political meltdown and turmoil. We just recorded a Right Angle show on Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Scott's show was talking about how she's going to carry a gun to Congress, and that's what she's going to do. My personal favorite at the moment, fan favorite for me, is Senator Josh Hawley, who was instrumental in skewering Mark Zuckerberg for his repeated endless lies, and I really enjoyed watching him take him apart into that. I'd earned a lot of respect from me, and he's earned even more respect from me now because he's actually done something that's probably more important than enacting any kind of laws. He had a number of Antifa protesters on his front yard in front of his house, screaming at the house through bullhorn. And in a tweet earlier, he basically was not in town, as I understand it, leaving his wife and his 1-year-old child there. And this is a direct quote from the senator on a tweet. "Tonight, while I was in Missouri, Antifa scumbags came to our place in D.C. and threatened my wife and newborn daughter who can't travel." And then he goes on to talk about what they did. But that's what they are. They're scumbags. And I'm very glad he said that. Scott, if somebody was standing outside of your house and had bullhorns and were threatening make just a mob outside of your house, and you're halfway across the country and you hear this, and these people come to your door ostensibly to deliver a copy of the Constitution, but your wife asked them to leave and they don't, what would your reaction be to that kind of thing?
I think it's hard for me to imagine such a thing happening given my great insignificance. But obviously, this is not something anybody should do to anybody. I mean, you've got an opportunity to express your opinion in various ways in this country. There's no shortage of possibilities for you having your voice to be heard. So clearly, if you're showing up en masse on somebody's front yard and in front of their family, you're not there for a political lobbying effort. You're there to either embarrass or threaten or imply a threat to the sitting official and his family. And that should be unacceptable by any description or any definition of the word. I don't know how much security senators get. I don't think they have their own Secret Service details, but I would hope that there are provisions made for situations like this so that they can be protected. I don't care what your political cause is. I don't care if this was a cause that I would support, a pro-life rally gathering on the front yard of somebody. That's not where political speech is supposed to happen, in front of somebody's house. And what kind of morons show up there when the senator's not even there? Either people who don't know that he's not there, or people who do know that he's not there and know that the intimidation factor will be much more intense if it's just his wife and infant child there than if he were there himself. I'd privately charter a jet and be on my way back there as fast as possible to defend my wife and child. And I'm not making any assumptions about what this group has done. I haven't seen the video of it. I don't know what really happened at the property. I just think that the method they chose for expressing their opinion is completely inappropriate and smacks of intimidation and threat of bodily harm, especially to one's family. And under any kind of democratic society, that should be unacceptable, even to the people who agree with the Antifa agenda.
That's their brand. That's what they do. That's their job. They're the street muscle. They're designed to intimidate people through physical violence and force, and to get people into full compliance. That's what their job is. They're the brown shirts. That's their job. They're the street muscle. And in terms of intimidation goes, they probably picked the wrong guy. Hawley went on to say this morning's printing, talking about the story, printing outright lies from the Antifa group who now describe themselves as sweet angels. BS. I could fill in for you what that means. You screamed through bullhorns. You shouted down my wife when she asked you to leave. You vandalized property, pounded on our door, and terrorized neighbors. And you didn't have the guts to do it in daylight, but only under cover of darkness so you could hide. You're scum, and we won't be intimidated. I like the sound of that. That is long overdue for these scum that will not intimidate people. Steve, in a related story, and I think a real bellwether story of things to come, given the political climate of the insanity of this whole defund the police movement and all the rest of it. We go now to Florida. Turns out that not all Florida men are morons. Florida man here is a Florida sheriff, and he basically says to Antifa and BLM and anybody else who thinks that political protest consists of smashing stores and burning things down, this is a direct quote, "I will deputize gun owners if you think you can bring your lawlessness here." Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have a society, Steve, where not only the rule of law is utterly mocked by the elitists in charge, but where the entire virtue signaling is now a race to see who can remove police protection from the American public the fastest, all of a sudden you have sheriffs standing up and saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm not buying any of this stuff. You come into our city or Clay County, as it turns out, Clay County, Florida, and you start burning property here or intimidating people or starting fires, then I'm going to deputize the entire population, and every single gun owner in this county will then be acting under color of law." That's a kind of a 21st century solution to this problem, isn't it?
Well, it's actually kind of old school when you think about it. Like, it seems ridiculous at first blush to deputize an entire county's law-abiding population, but in a crazy time, the ridiculous becomes the necessary, and that's exactly what this sheriff is threatened to do, is the necessary in this crazy time. I kind of like to get back to this idea, the protests themselves. Before I do, though, I have to tell a story. Back when I used to live on D Street in Eureka, California, far northern California, behind the Redwood Curtain, we used to say, about 5.5 hours north of San Francisco. We're talking really northern California. My particular neighborhood, and I have no idea, was a hotbed for various religious groups handing out pamphlets, going to your door and asking for your time and all this. And I had my first apartment at the time, and I tried to very politely tell people to go away. We had the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons. It was so bad at one point, I think we had the Zoroastrians going from door to door. It was a crazy neighborhood for this kind of thing. And after, your dozenth visit in a month or 6 weeks, you start getting a little snappy with people. And that wasn't even working either. And so finally, out of desperation, a nice pair of young Mormon men came to my door. They had their pamphlets and their name tags on. They're very nicely dressed and all that. And I got an idea in my head. I actually invited them in to my little tiny crappy apartment living room. I offered them some lemonade, and they said, please, very, very nicely mannered young boys. And I went to my kitchen. I made a couple of glasses of country time. And before I picked up the glasses and returned to the living room with them, I took off my pants. And needless to say, they left in a big hurry. And after that, I swear somebody must have put an X on some shared map, because nobody came to my door again after that. It was kind of brilliant. Maybe you want to try this yourself. I mentioned this after 30 years as an apology to the two young men I shocked. I hope they got over it. That said, you have the right to protest peaceably. You have the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. A riot is not a protest. Harassing the wife and family of a politician is not addressing the government. You're not petitioning the government. You're harassing citizens. You're terrorizing citizens. That's not allowed. Listen, you can come to my door. Maybe you want to hand me the pamphlet about your religion. You want to save my soul. I'm touched. That's great. Maybe you're trying to sell me something. Maybe it's something I'm interested in buying. But coming to my door is a privilege, not a right. And once I've told you to get off my property, you have exactly one choice, and that is to do an about face and march off my property. Failure to do so, I have to admire. No, I don't have to admire. I have to marvel would be a better word at the restraint shown here, because if those folks showed up at my door and didn't leave when I told them to, which is my right, not theirs, then the Mossberg's coming out, end of story.
Yeah, and given the numerous statements on the part of the two people who claim to have won the election, you'll go to jail for that. And the people who you may have shot will undoubtedly become martyrs, and they'll have statues raised to them. And this is what happens when the world goes upside down. This is what happens when everything goes upside down. People are not going to take it. These are signs that people are not going to take it. We're going to see more and more and more of this in the future as this situation continues to develop, as the government becomes the enemy of the people. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. When the government is the agency saying to policemen, you cannot arrest this person who is burning down this guy's restaurant. You have to let him burn it down for political reasons. When the government becomes the enemy of the people, then the people will start to take these things into their own hands. And God bless that sheriff for understanding how this whole thing works. You know, one of the things that came to me late in my political education was the value of the idea of the sheriff as somebody who is one individual who bears personal responsibility for the law enforcement of his jurisdiction. He's not beholden to councils. He's not beholden to mayors. He's not beholden to anything except for the people. Sheriffs continue to impress me on a daily basis in this country. I've time and time again, I have seen or heard of sheriffs who say, I am not going to enforce this law, which is clearly unconstitutional. God bless him. So this is the world that people claim to have voted for. This is the world that the political party on the left has been basically touting. The idea of defunding the police, the idea of making the police into the bad guys. Well, if you decide to withdraw police protection and the murder rate in Washington, D.C. skyrockets back to where it hasn't been since early 2000s, and it'll go higher, then don't be surprised if a congressman decides to carry a pistol with her to keep herself safe as she goes to her daily business. It's her constitutional right. She hasn't had to exercise it prior to that because there had been some form of law enforcement prior to that. That's gone. Those are the politics you want. Those are the politics you're going to get. You want to come to somebody's house to protest? You want to protest Josh Hawley? The place to do that is on the steps of the Capitol building while he is at work. If you want to come to his house with a gang outside, and I don't care how big it is, and you start making threatening gestures, and just having a gang outside of your house with bullhorns shouting at you is a threatening gesture as far as I'm concerned. Don't be surprised if somebody decides to defend their own house and their own property. And finally, if you think that you can continue to burn things down in this country and call that political protest and have the protection of the news media and one of the two major parties in the United States of America, if you think the American people are going to tolerate this forever, you're wrong. You're wrong. And these are the signs that this sort of thing is now starting to reach a point where we are getting into very dangerous territory by people who knew full well what they were doing. And in fact, this is their entire intent. So you want to play with fire, you're going to get burned. You've got to simply say to yourself at some point, for the love of God, you cannot live in an inverted society any longer where the criminals are the ones who are protected by the government. A society like that will not survive the rest of the year, let alone the rest of the decade or the century. So we're in for interesting times. These messages are made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, and we've taken on a lot of new members lately. We're very grateful for your support. We desperately need it, as you can tell from the stories that have gone from whimsical to simply unbelievable. We need your help. And many of you have made a one-time donation at BillWhittle.com. And if I could thank every one of you personally, I would have done it. We're very, very grateful. And we need to continue to get that kind of support to keep these messages coming. So we really appreciate your help in that regard. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle, and we will see you next week right here on Right Angle.